Okay. Well, um, welcome everyone for joining us. It's something of a sad occasion. Obviously, it's that my dad passed away, um, but he had the really he had you know he had quite a wonderful life. He had a very interesting, good life, uh, and a pretty long one. He didn't live to 103, I think, which is what he calculated he needed to live to um, get all of his money back from his retirement annuity or whatever calculation that was to get his money's worth out of his retirement. Um, but 80 isn't too bad. And the what he got to do during those 80 years uh, was quite amazing. Sorry, there's a couple other people trying to join. Um, so just kind of talk about what we're going to do today. We're going to have a eulogy, which I will attempt to read. I did manage to make it through at least once yesterday. We'll see how I do today. And I think Lee would like to say a few words, and my brother Jeff, and then Beth Schlipp wanted to say something. I hope she's here. I haven't been keeping track of the list. And then honestly, I'd like anyone else who kind of wants to raise their hand and unmute themselves and say something. If you have something to say, that would be great as well. So I guess I will get started. So who was Joel Bastow? He was a storyteller. One of the emails I got from a former colleague noted he always had a story, usually a long one. He had a lifetime of stories to tell, and if you let him, you could spend your lifetime listening to them. I have proof of that. The 5 or so hours of interviews I have with him maybe takes us past his first birthday. Maybe hearing the same story for the 100th time was tiring, but I know people who only met him once or twice who would tell me what a great storyteller he was. I watched him hold court. He was a preacher's kid, and not in a good way. Being a preacher's kid meant everyone thought the best of him, and he took every advantage of it. He hid a dead snake between the door and the screen door, scaring his Aunt Jenny half to death and getting his brother blamed for it. Early in elementary school, while the teacher wasn't watching, he whaled the school bully in the back of the head with a rock. When the teacher came out to see the bully having Joel in a headlock, it was the bully who had to stay after school. In college, with apparently little better to do, he started making and selling smoke bombs that could be slid under a dorm room door. He boosted sales by setting a few off himself and then blaming others, thus pitting his classmates against each other, who would proceed to buy more bombs from him for revenge. He managed to shut off the power at the Delta Tau Delta fraternity across the street after littering the basement stairs with empty bottles and cans. He also took the ring out of their bell by lighting a fire under it. It didn't destroy the bell, but at the next football game, it didn't so much ring as make an unsatisfying clunk. He was from a different time, even from the time he lived in. He always spoke as if he grew up like Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn. This magical feral childhood where after school he would go off in the woods exploring with his father's guide dog for hours on end. With a blind father and a working mother, there was really no one around to keep an eye on him. Growing up, the first house he lived in had no running water. He had an ice box most of his childhood, literally a box that held a block of ice that was delivered once or twice a week by the iceman to keep their food cold. He attended a one-room elementary school that also had no running water and had a pot-bellied stove for heat and a two-holer for whatever a two-holer is for. I remember one of the times he was visiting the home school, someone asked if he rode there on a horse. He did actually take a school bus. He was a father. What can I say? He could be as embarrassing as hell, but he was my dad, or maybe it was because he was my dad, and I've had success in keeping that tradition going. But he would load up the VW Square back with Jeff and me and a bunch of friends and one or two in the way back with no one with a seatbelt on, and take us into DC to the Smithsonian. In England, he loaded up the car with Jeff and me and a bunch of our friends and took us to Brimham Rocks or Fountains Abbey or Newby Hall or Scarborough when there was a storm raging out in the North Sea. He was a son. He talked about his dad being his best friend. He actually took his blind dad ice skating on some sometimes sketchy ponds. His dad could follow him by the sound of his skates. And they would also go out and ride bicycles together. He would put a card in his spokes to make enough noise that his dad could follow. But he also talks about being treated like a surrogate son by his Uncle John and Aunt Olive and Aunt Jenny and Uncle Frank. At times living with them, but just spending a lot of family time together. He was a lover of ancestry and family history. He loved his ancestral heritage, but maybe not in the way that many people would. It wasn't about the rich or famous or distinguished. He mostly spoke not of his well-to-do and upstanding Allen ancestors, but of Holsworth Bastow, who in his youth pushed up coal cart in the mines of New Pudsley outside of Leeds in North Yorkshire. As I heard it, upon learning that his future mother-in-law was a daughter of the American Revolution, his mother, my grandmother Gladys, decided to one-up her and become a daughter of the Mayflower colony, to which she was entitled due to her Allen ancestry. However, upon finding out that our Mayflower ancestors were in fact America's first white-collar criminals and were deported from the colony after apparently cheating both sides of the transatlantic trade, she never spoke of it again, and my dad never stopped speaking of it. He was a bit of a cheapskate when it came to himself. And let me clarify, he wanted value for money and didn't want to pay for anything he didn't need. He was an avid reader of Consumer Reports and lived by their recommendations. He would special order cars dutifully researched and recommended by Consumer Reports with no options, no cassette deck, no radio, no AC. Then he would proceed to drive them into the ground. I recall in one car, he eventually removed the passenger seat option. He loved his collection of $1 thrift store baseball caps and shopping at the dollar store. He and Lee would compete to see who could get the cheapest gas. I know when we would travel back and forth between Maryland and Massachusetts that he made every effort to fill up the tank in New Jersey. But he was generous to others. He often offered and never hesitated to pick up the dinner check, no matter how big. He generously gave time and money to honor Rippon's hornblowers and to restore the North Attleboro's home school. He gave a great deal of time to Rippon's scouts. He helped the UU build a new church in Delaware. A few years ago, he covered the cost of flying his whole family to the UK for a family trip. He helped his grandniece make her way through college. And he always remembered everyone's birthdays, anniversaries, Valentine's Day, Christmas. He was a showman. When he wanted to get my mom a piano for her birthday, he couldn't just pick one out. He surprised her by having two delivered and letting her pick. While living in England, he surprised my mom with a renewing of their vows in Ripon Cathedral. He convinced her that they were just going out to dinner, but had conspired with the old deanery restaurant and the deacon of the cathedral to have a whole event. When he proposed to Lee, it couldn't just be a simple getting on one knee and asking. It was a whole event with all her family and friends and family. And I'm sure no one who participated over the years will forget his suit as he presided over extreme croquet. He was a husband. He was a wonderful husband to my mother. I mean, they could have one hell of an argument, but at the end of the day, they always worked it out. Once they went from one car to two cars, he would actually get one for my mom that had actual options. When my mom got sick, he took care of her in ways that I think we all can only hope we are capable of. And when she died, he was lost for some time, until he met Lee and got a second lease on life. I won't speak for Lee. I think he may have needed her more than she needed him, but I know he loved her very much to the very end, and no amount of time they could spend together would have been too much for him. He was a bad driver, and I'm being a little unfair with this video. This is the only one I could find. And he didn't actually drive a Debenhams truck over the edge of the hill next to our house. But had he been the driver of that truck, you never know. He wasn't just a bad driver, he was a terrible driver, but he had no fear, and it was never his fault. It started soon after he got his license, which he got without glasses stipulation because he had some quack optometrist who convinced him he could, quote, exercise his eyes from 2400 vision to 2020. Apparently squinted, I mean exercised his way through the Mass State eye exam. And not long after being issued his license, glasses free, he took a right turn a little too early and proceeded to drive across someone's front lawn. He told him when moving to Maryland, he hitched up a U-Haul trailer to his VW Bug. Apparently, it was slightly too overloaded with books for the Bug's brakes, and on a particular downhill with a major intersection at the bottom displaying a red light, was unable to stop. That time, he made it through without any damage or injury. Two of his Ripon scouting friends have told me of their terror of driving with him, one time entering the A1 on an off-ramp, starting to head southbound on the northbound side. My brother recalls a similar thing happening when we were kids over here, so it can't be blamed solely on the driving on the other side of the road. And on the way to work one day in England, he hit a spot of black ice and managed to land the car on top of a hedge. I think it may have taken a crane to extricate it. Maybe this one. It never really got any better. He was a traveler, an explorer, an adventurer. Not having traveled further than Boston or Providence as a child, he took travel with an unrivaled enthusiasm, beginning when the Army started shipping him around, first to Monterey, then Shimia, then Maryland. When I was 4 or 5, we drove to Florida to watch the space launch, where he also decided it'd be a good idea to poke a wild alligator alongside the road with a stick. When we moved to California in the 70s, we drove across the country in an overloaded Volkswagen Squareback, and I kind of recall visiting every national park and attraction along the way. When he moved back 18 months later, he and my mom drove back together and did the same. While in California, he took us to Yosemite, Yellowstone, and the Grand Canyon. He took us to see the giant redwoods. He took us to San Francisco and Mexico, and that may have been just within the first 4 months. He also took us to Disneyland. While living in England, we took road trips every year, going up and down the island into Ireland, and several times across the channel of the North Sea to the continent. Upon finally being sent home from England after 7 years, he couldn't just take the boring government-sponsored Pan Am flight. He took us on a QE2 along with 12 pieces of luggage, our cat, and our car. Upon finally being sent home from England in his earlier years, he took a bus to his Army posting at Monterey Language School, stopping to take a swim in the Great Salt Lake. Even in elementary school, he was an explorer. He managed to convince the teacher to have him lead the whole class to Attleborough's Angletree Stone. Little did she know that he was leading her and a group of 1st through 4th graders a good 3 or so miles through the woods each way. On his round-the-world trip for the NSA, he went swimming alone in the ocean on Wake Island, only to be told afterwards about the poisonous stonefish that inhabit the waters there. On the flight to Tokyo, he got to fly in a nearly empty 747 where the crew outnumbered the passengers. And flying through Delhi, he swapped his rubber change purse for a small carved wooden bridge containing several miniature hand-carved ivory elephants. He always wanted to skydive, though he never did. I'm guessing my mom mixed that. But he did bend over backwards, high up over the edge of a castle wall and kiss the Blarney Stone. He went hot air ballooning. I think he may have taken a glider ride. He once took my brother and I in a search for the Loch Ness Monster. He rented a rowboat and proceeded to row us down the loch, apparently downwind, as when he decided it was time to turn around and head back, he realized there was quite a bit of a headwind. It took all his strength to get us back. And the best we got was seeing the Loch Ness Monster floating by, which gets us to something he wasn't. He wasn't a boater, but he desperately wanted to be. And despite everyone's reservations, he kept trying, going so far as to rent dock space in Millsboro for his dinghy. This too extends back to his childhood, where he tells of finding a small tub in a nearby field and he put it in a full drainage ditch along the train tracks near his house. He went to show off his new boat to his Uncle Frank and proceeded to tip it over, promptly dumping himself into a couple feet of muddy water. I recall something very similar happening on the Indian River 60 or so years later. He was a follower of science and technology. He won 3rd prize in the Mass State Science Fair. He got a full ride to MIT, which his mother rejected and sent him to Wesleyan instead. He always wanted the latest gadgets, and often ones that didn't exist. When he finally bought a car with all the options, it was a Prius, which to him was not so much a car as a large moving gadget, although he did drive it into the ground. He loved Elon Musk. His favorite non-$1 hat was his Boring Company hat. He desperately wanted to see self-driving cars in his lifetime. Quite frankly, we all did. And of course, he was a hornblower. I think this was probably the pinnacle of his existence. What other opportunity could he have to stand up and tell a story to a new group of people every single night, as well as uphold an ancient tradition, get himself on TV, and get himself in newspapers around the world? There was so much more I can say about him, but I'll leave you with this. What he mostly believed in doing and what motivated what he did was to make the world a better place. And in a sometimes uniquely Joel way, make the people around him the best they could be.
No, I'm muted. I can talk.
I think you will like to invite you to do that.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Are you good? Are you ready, Lee?
Yes, I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can everybody else hear me?
I think everyone else is muted, but.
Okay. Joel was my lover for 8 years, my friend, my financial advisor, my companion on many trips and adventures, my partner in crime in England and at home, my spiritual cohort, devoted father and grandfather to our extended families, opinionated on many issues, great in a debate, and usually won. He loved animals. He was interested in politics and issues. He was a Republican who often voted Democratic. He loved good food, but did not enjoy cooking. He was a perfect host at parties and helpful in cleanup. He liked to buy houses and was a very good landlord. We shared a special love in our senior years. I will miss him terribly. Parkinson's disease is a terrible disease. Sadly, Joel, I will miss him terribly. Love, love, love. I have a poem from Maya Angelou which sort of fits Joel in his time of death. It reminds me of his strength and how he touched the lives of so many friends and acquaintances. The name of the poem is When the Great Trees Fall. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil in silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great trees fall, the air around us becomes light, rare, and sterile. We breathe briefly. Our eyes briefly see with a hurtful clarity. Our memory suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on kind words unsaid. Promised walks never taken. Great souls die and irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. To be our senses restored, never to be the same. Whisper to us. They existed, he existed, we can be and be better, for he existed. I will really miss him a lot. We had a great time for 8 years. Thank you. John?
Yep. Sorry. Yeah. So Jeff, Jeff will be. I think Jeff is getting himself ready.
Okay, you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, I'm going to really miss my dad. I mean, I've lived on the West Coast now for last 19 years. Really only gotten to see him a couple of weeks a year for most years. But he was the one I talked to most on my way home, commuting, my way back, on my way to work or on my way home, especially because John always goes to bed early. And, you know, my dad's, I'm really thankful for what he did for me in my childhood, for how he raised me. I love all the places we got to visit. I really think I had one of the easiest childhoods in the world and one of the most exciting. But my dad was also a dad of contradictions. As John mentioned, you know, I'm going to be a little more polite. Dad was not a good driver. One of my earliest memories of driving with Dad was my brother and I screaming at him as he was going down, like either on or off the wrong ramp on the freeway, and us screaming that he's going the wrong way. And my dad saying, "What do you mean I'm going the wrong way? You don't even know where we're going." We're like, "No, Dad, the sign says the wrong way." And yet, for some reason, growing up, Dad was always the one who drove. I don't know why, but, you know, despite his driving, he was always the one who ended up driving everywhere, where Mom never drove. And he was also the one who taught me how to drive. And he was by far one of the best driving instructors I could ever have. He was not afraid, probably because no matter what I did, he'd done it before. But he was, you know, he was awesome in teaching me to drive. I remember Dad kind of being a cheapskate at times, and yes, that's his word, not mine. You know, as John mentioned, he'd always buy the car with no features. I do remember a lot of complaints, both from him and Mom, about John's dinner choices. It seemed like whenever we went out to a restaurant, John had a way of finding the most expensive meal on the menu, and I heard no end of that from Dad later. And yet, he took us everywhere. Like, we went to California and we visited just about every place you could reach within a couple days drive of California, of Los Angeles, where we were. In England, we went on summer vacations every summer to all sorts of different parts of Europe, different parts in England, you know, and so, and he paid for me to go to England 3 different times as an adult. And the last time, you know, we took our whole family. And so, I mean, while there were times he would buy the cheapest thing, he was generous to a fault. On the, you know, growing up on the discipline side, I do remember if I got into too much trouble, Mom would always say, "Wait till Dad gets home." And I'd be terrified. And yet, most of the time when Dad came home, that was fun time. We had game nights when he came home. We had movie nights. I remember many times watching Dallas on our TV. You know, so Dad coming home was usually the fun time. Dad on weekends was usually the fun time. I do remember for one summer when I graduated college, Mom went to England first, and then I ended up living with Dad for a couple of months or a month before he left, and then I rented their house. And I remember my dad trying to be like the parent on both sides at that point and be like my mom and dad. He didn't do very well at it. Despite the fact that I was always scared of him when Mom said, you know, "Wait till Dad comes home." He was really a softie most of the time. And I also remember my dad's relationship with cats. According to Dad, he hated cats. Always did. And yet we had cats growing up. I'm sure that's mostly because of my mom. And Dad always treated the cats generously. I don't know why this sticks in my mind, but it does, because I always remember him telling me later how much he hated cats and that he never wanted cats in his life. And yet, even when my mom died and Penny was still living with him, you know, he treated her great as a cat, and that's the way he was. And, you know, my dad would be generous to most people too. Like, as most of you have probably seen it, my dad would help people. He'd care for people. If people needed something, he was always there to help out. And yet Dad could also rip into people like nobody's business. And, you know, he was just full of contradictions like that. But yet, you know, he was at heart a really great person. And, you know, I'm glad to know that he's in God's loving arms now. And I'm really grateful for everything he did for me. And, you know, I'm going to really miss him.
So is Beth Schlip here? I know she wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I am Beth Schulp, and I particularly wanted to have a chance to speak a little. Died in 2018. They met in 2004 at the Columbia Unitarian Universalist congregation. They bonded very quickly, maybe because they were the same age. Their birthdays were just 2 weeks apart. I feel like Joel got cheated a little to be always saying he made it to 80 when he missed 81 by just one day. But more likely, they bonded because they both belonged to the men's group and were in the same INU discussion groups for 2 or 3 years. These INU groups met twice a month for 8 or 9 months. Joel and Ron were both very serious about the group. They thought deeply and researched every discussion topic. Joel even emailed his comments when he could not attend. I have to make a tiny comment on the Dollar Tree. When we were visiting Joel and Lee in Delaware, Joel said, "Come on, I've got to show you the most fantastic store I've ever seen." And so we go, when we get there, it's the Dollar Tree. I just couldn't understand how he never noticed it in Maryland because we have a lot of Dollar Trees here. Anyway, we were lucky enough, my husband and I, to spend a month in Northern Yorkshire with Joel and Lee. Joel exchanged houses with a friend from the time he worked in the area, but they did not exchange cars, and I guess we all know why. Taking a trip with Joel to an area where he had lived for several years was priceless. Not only did we go places we probably would never have found on our own, but we met local residents and visited his cousin a couple of times. Of course, we went to Ripon, where we blower ceremony and the statue Joel had made, which has the names of all the horn blowers back over 1,100 years. As I am sure you all know, Joel stepped up to be the deputy, or I'm not sure it was called deputy, but the substitute horn blower to ensure there would be no interruption in this historic ceremony. Joel loved to learn, laugh, talk, tell stories, but what stands out for me was his strong personal moral code. I honestly can't think of a specific example, but it was a strong feeling I got as the result of very many little things. I think Joel was the person who really walked the walk. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really nice. I guess so. I guess if anyone else would, have anything they'd like to say, if you maybe send a message so we can have it sort of organized. It's a little more difficult to get people lined up in a virtual room than. But if everyone has anything they'd like to say. If not, I do have just one little video. So let me get that up. A little slideshow I'd like to share. If I can find it. having trouble finding. Oh, there we go.
Dad, is there supposed to be music to this? So I guess that's about it. I mean, if anyone wants to unmute and we can chat among ourselves, and one thing one thing I did take note of when I was going through all the photos is there's kind of like a 30-year gap or so between photos from when he kind of basically from when he was a child, and then his wedding photos, and then photos from basically kind of the time that after Carrie and I got married, started seeing photos of the wedding. And basically, I think what it was is he was always the one behind the camera, and sometimes sometimes to a fault, or often to a fault. I often feared that he lived his life through a viewfinder at times, but I do hope when I'm allowed to go to Maryland next and check out the stuff in the basement, that I'm able to see some more photos of him, other than the hornblower, of course. Basically, a 30-year gap effect of hornblower photos.
Yeah. I'd like to say a few words. This is Jim Wu from Columbia, Maryland. Can you hear me? I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Joel was an active member of the men's group, and he was the extrovert. He was he was the extrovert. I was raised as an introvert, born and raised in Baltimore. And my parents, born and raised in China, raised me to be quiet. And, and meeting someone like Joel, he's touched all our lives. And in the Unitarian tradition, I'd like to salute him with coffee. And the thing that comes to mind is the things I've learned from the Unitarians and picked up from different religions is I like the phrase l'chaim, to life. So to life, thank you, Joel, for touching all of our lives.
Thank you.
I'll say a few words too. Inge Heider, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you.
I'm going to read what I wrote in the Forever Missed, because that I can do that better. So I was a friend of Joel's through the UU Congregation of Columbia, starting with a spiritual support group, which met every Tuesday evening for many years, long, long ago. I also attended Joel's potluck and movie evenings where he showed the series Secret Army, and I sure enjoyed his hospitality. Another connection with Joel was a crocheted Afghan that his wife had not been able to finish before she died, and Joel asked me if I could finish it. I was so glad to be able to do that for Joel. I also remember the tree that he chopped or sawed down at his Columbia house. Several of us were concerned that it might hit the house, but again, Joel knew what he was doing. Most recently, I saw Joel at UU services and only very occasionally, and of course, always exchanged hugs. So many good memories. I'm so glad that he and Lee found happiness together for his last years, and I'm happy to be here with you all. So that's it for me.
Thank you.
Many fond memories.
So I think Mariah and Chillery wanted to say something. Or Jeff.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
So you mentioned earlier that he was a really good storyteller, and I remember when he did have the chance to come out here. More recently, when I was older, I would wake up early and I would go to talk to him, and he would he had so many good stories. A lot of them were about him and his dad, and it was just really fun and nice to be able to hear more about who he was, because I'd mostly just heard about stories from him from my parents, but it was really nice to be able to sit with him in the mornings and just talk for hours while we would eat breakfast and then just sit there even afterwards until, I don't know, Jonathan came up screaming and we had to go do something. But it was really nice being able to talk to him because he did have so many good stories.
Okay, it's my turn now. Okay, so
We can only see your left eye, so.
Okay, I think I remember more from when I was young, before I got adopted, and we would get these really big boxes and put them in the living room, and he would pretend he was a big bad wolf, and we would hide in the boxes and he would chase us and stuff like that. And I guess we grew up, and I see that Larry says she would come down and talk to him, but I feel like it's like that quote where you're you don't know what you have until it's until you don't have it anymore, because I feel like when you're a teenager, you don't really you're just oh, it's just my grandpa, you know. So I feel we should have spent more time with him, honestly, and we could have, and but I'm glad he's in a good place, and yeah.
No, he really loved you guys. He loved all his grandkids, and you know, I don't know if there's ever enough time you can spend with people, but you know, it was, he had a, you know, we all got to spend a lot of time with him. So I guess if no one else has anything, I really thank you everyone for coming. I thank everyone who's you know, put stuff on the memorial site and all that. And you know, I guess we just want to, you know, everyone just keep them in your memories. And I guess the last thing, you know, I know the UU thing may be the coffee, but in his honor, maybe you know, everyone should have a glass of white Zinfandel or chillable red tonight for to toast him. So okay, well, thank you for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
That's it.
Thank you, John.
All right, bye, John.
Bye, Lee. Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Lee.
Bye-bye.
Miss you, love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, everybody.
You want to say bye? Say bye. Say bye-bye. Okay.
Love you.
Hi, Jonathan.
He says, I love you, John. Did you hear that?
I
He
love
says,
you.
I love you.
I love you. I love you.
Thanks, John, for putting this on. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
I love you.
Really gonna miss him.
So,
Jonathan says, I love you forever and ever, Lee.
oh, I love you forever and ever, Jonathan. I'm going to blow you a kiss. Okay. Okay. Jonathan's up there. Yeah.
He's gotten big.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. Look at him.
He's just
Hi, Jeff.
a young college.
Bye, Lee. Love you.
I love you. Hi.
Hi, Bastos.
Great. Ever and ever and ever.
I love you forever and ever.
Right. Wonderful.
Can they hear me?
Well, basically.
I miss
She's-
you. One of these
Oh,
days,
can't
I'm
hear
gonna
that.
come out. Okay? We can
Okay.
Zoom together.
Yeah.
Okay? All right, we'll Zoom. All right. Good.
Hey, Lee, you have an iPhone, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so we can always FaceTime because I have an iPhone now too.
Okay, so we can all Zoom, okay?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Sorry for your loss, John and Jeff. He was a great guy.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Hey, who do you have with you, Lee?
There's
Oh
Ashley.
no, you're at John's. Okay, I see.
Yeah, I'm at John's.
Because I sort of saw John floating. His head would float in and out occasionally.
I'm here too.
Yeah.
Sorry for the.
No, it's
You got
great.
John.
We have a big screen. There's Sharon.
John and Jeff, I'm really sorry for your loss. He was such a wonderful guy. He really just was wonderful.
He was unusual.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're certainly unusual.
So generous. So generous.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll.
Good.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Well.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
It's nice to see
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thanks, John.
Together, John.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Carrie, for helping.
I'm just gonna